Today we're going to look at solid geometry. A solid is just another word for a three-dimensional object. Here's a look at the objectives that we'll cover, and here is a list of the vocabulary. So when dealing with three-dimensional figures, the solid can be made up of flat or curved surfaces. Each of the flat surfaces is called a face, and a face is a flat surface, so you can consider it a plane. And remember, planes are named with 3 letters. The edges are the segments or the lines. Segment, remember, can be named with 2 letters. And a vertex are going to be the points or the corners of your solids. And a vertex or point can be named with 1 letter. Here's a list of the 3-dimensional figures we'll be looking at. The first one is a prism. A prism is formed by 2 parallel congruent polygonal faces called bases. So from here on out, we're going to refer to the parallel congruent faces as bases, and when I refer to faces, I'm going to be talking about all of the sides that are not the base. The second three-dimensional figure is a cylinder. A cylinder is a lot like a prism, but its bases are circles, and it has a curved surface that connects the bases. The third is a pyramid. A pyramid only has 1 base, and all of its faces are triangles so that they can meet at a common vertex. So they'll all come up to meet at one point. And then the last one is a cone. A cone is very similar to a pyramid. It only has 1 base, but its base is a circle, and it has a curved surface that connects the base to a vertex. So again, it has 1 point that it all comes up to. So prisms and cylinders have 2 bases. Pyramids and cones only have 1 base. A lot of times when we see 3-dimensional objects, people refer to them as cubes. However, a cube is a prism that has 6 square faces. It has to be perfectly square. Other prisms and pyramids are named for the shape of their bases. Look at these solids and see if you can name them. The first one has 2 bases, and the base is a triangle, so we would call it a triangular prism. Can you figure out what the rest are? The second one is a rectangular prism because its base is a rectangle. The next is a pentagonal or pentagonal prism. The fourth one is a hexagonal prism or hexagonal prism. And then we come down to our pyramids. I know that it's a pyramid because it only has 1 base. The first one has a base that's a triangle, so that'll be a triangular pyramid. Then a rectangular pyramid. The next one has a base with 5 sides, so that's a pentagonal pyramid. And then the last one has 6 sides on its base, so that's a hexagonal pyramid. Let's look at this example. It wants us to classify the figure. Classify just means it wants us to tell what kind of shape it is. Looking at it, it looks like a cube, but since there aren't any markings to let us know that the sides are squares, we'll have to say that it's a rectangular prism. Next, it wants us to name the vertices. Vertices are all of the points, which are the corners of your shape. Since we name points with 1 letter, you would list all of the letters for your vertices. The next thing it asks us to find are the edges. Edges are the segments, so we would have to name it as a segment, and that's going to be 2 letters with a line above it. So here's a list of all of the edges. And then lastly, it wants us to name the bases. Now, bases do not have to be the top and the bottom of a shape. The definition of a prism is that the bases are parallel and congruent. So in this example, we could have different bases. So here's a list of possible bases. So you could have the top and the bottom, considered bases, or you could have the left and the right side, or you could consider the front and the back to be bases, since all of those are parallel and congruent to each other. See if you can do this example on your own. The first thing they want us to look at is to classify the figure. Since it only has 1 base, and that base has 5 sides, I know it's a pentagonal pyramid. Next, it wants us to name the vertices. The vertices are all of the points or the corners, so I would just list all of the letters. The next thing it wants us to look at are the edges. Edges are the segments, so I would list all of the segments. And then lastly, it wants us to find the base. Since it's a pyramid, there is only 1 base, and it has to be the pentagon A, B, C, D, E. Since bases are flat surfaces, we know that they are also considered planes, so you could name the base with just 3 letters. Try this example. This figure is a cone. This only has one vertex because M is not a corner of the shape, so the vertex would just be N. The cone only has curved surfaces, so there are no edges. And then the base would be considered circle M, and you would write that with the circle and then the letter M. The next thing we're going to look at is a net. A net is a diagram of the surfaces or the faces and bases of a solid, and you would fold them to form the three-dimensional figure. So to identify a three-dimensional figure from a net, you're going to want to look at the number of faces and the shape of each face. Let's look at an example. This first one gives us 6 squares. So since it's 6 squares, if I think about folding this up into a three-dimensional shape, it would give us a cube. In this example, we have a circle and a half of a circle. So the only shapes that I know of that have circles are going to be a cylinder and a cone. I know that a cylinder has to have 2 circular bases, and since this one only has 1 circular base, I know that it has to be a cone. In this example, we're given 4 triangles. If I think about trying to fold this shape up, I'm not going to be able to fold it so that I have 2 bases. So that tells me that it has to be a pyramid. And since all of the shapes are triangles, the base has to be a triangle, so it'd be a triangular pyramid. In this example, we have 2 circles and a rectangle. The only shapes that have circles are going to be a cylinder and a cone. So since cylinders have 2 circular bases and cones only have 1 circular base, I know that this has to be a cylinder. The last thing that we're going to look at is called a cross section. A cross section is the intersection of a three-dimensional figure or a solid and a plane. So remember, a plane is a flat surface. So let's look at some examples. In the first one, it wants us to describe the cross section. So we see that the plane is intersecting the cone at the vertex, at the very top. So since it's crossing it at the vertex, the cross section is simply a point. In this example, the plane is intersecting the pentagonal pyramid in the middle, and the middle of the pyramid is in the shape of a pentagon as well. So the cross section is a pentagon. So all of our answers for the cross section is going to be a 2-dimensional shape. In this one, the cross section of the plane or the flat surface with this hexagonal prism is going to be a hexagon. You can see the outline of the figure in the picture. In this example, the cross section of the plane and the cone is in the shape of a triangle. This example is a little more complicated because there's not a picture. You would have to think about what it's going to look like. A piece of cheese is a prism with equilateral triangular bases. So that's going to be a triangular prism. How can you slice the cheese to make an equilateral triangle? So this is what it would look like. So you would have to slice it parallel to the bases. What about a rectangle? This is what it would look like. So you would have to cut it perpendicular to the bases. Good luck.